Hey folks, there's a good chance that a fair few of you probably clicked on this video either out of annoyance or a sense of righteous indignation, which is all well and good. This is an argumentative video by nature, but I do feel the need to give you a little bit of a primer before we get into things properly. I have a whole little playlist about Robert Kirkman's Invincible. In particular, I like to spend some time analyzing the differences between the show and the comic and the ways that the show transcends its source material in a lot more ways than you probably even realize. Those will be linked above here, and I recommend you probably check out one or two of those before you come back to this one if you're someone who is likely to disagree with me on this one, because either you're going to like and agree with the things that I said in those other videos and find my analysis valuable, in which case you're going to be more open-minded to the arguments in this video, or you're going to find my completely apolitical whatever stuff entirely unconvincing, in which case, you know, why raise your blood pressure with this one, right? Either way, let's talk about Amber Bennett, one of the characters of all time. I like Amber. She's not one of my favorites or anything like that, but I like the way that she highlights some of our title characters' important traits in a way that you really couldn't achieve with any other character, and that certainly wasn't achieved with her comic book counterpart, but you didn't hear that from me. During the original run of 8 episodes, a prevailing narrative developed that Invincible was a great show with one major flaw. I don't know the exact origins of this narrative, but it was in part catalyzed by one, I'm gonna say it, atrocious video essay by YouTuber Lumoshroom. I won't be responding to all of their points here, but there are a few specific moments from that video that I can use for emphasis and specificity. For instance, there's some stuff about character presentation and character arcs and whatnot that I'm just not going to worry about too much. Plus, it's a little bit deceptively edited because he implies an order of events that didn't actually happen. So yeah, I'm not ignoring that stuff, it's just not what I'm interested in talking about today. As that video and several others like it argue, Amber is a poorly realized character because her actions are morally wrong in a manner that the show does not recognize, like the idiot's lantern, or, hey, let's be spicy, Captain Marvel. Carol, you participated in ethnic cleansing, you should not feel this triumphant. In Amber's case, the claimed moral failing varies, but generally goes as follows. Throughout season 1, Amber instills her boyfriend Mark with guilt over his chronic flakiness and false promises. This behavior is understandable until episode 7, wherein she reveals she's known for weeks that Mark's commitment issues are a result of the fact that he's a superhero. All of a sudden, people claim this entirely recontextualizes previous interactions between Mark and Amber. Now, rewatching scenes wherein she reprimands him for failing to make good on his guarantees, we're watching gross manipulation, an angry girlfriend hiding her knowledge of a situation to instill guilt in her significant other. The Lumoshroom video refers to this as gaslighting, because that's a fun buzzword we can use without actually understanding what it means.
In what world does a character gaslight their partner, repeatedly tell them they're insufficient, and withhold information that could alleviate their relationship issues and not be branded a villain?
So in the face of all this, why do I say Amber was right all along? What exactly was she right about? Put simply, season 1 Mark Grayson is a terrible boyfriend. And that makes sense, doesn't it? The Lumoshroom video makes this fact out to be some sort of a manipulative gambit by the writers, an attempt to knock our title character down a peg to make him look like a bad person.
Why does this script develop such a hate boner for the main character? What possible reason do any of these people have for treating Mark so unfavorably?
But interestingly, he doesn't make these same claims about all of the other times Mark is shown to be bad at something. In episode 1, he fails as a superhero, causes unnecessary damage during what should by all accounts be a relatively simple job. In episode 6, he disregards a serious situation for selfish reasons and inadvertently allows an innocent person to suffer. He does all these things because he's a flawed person. And just to cover my bases, the other possible argument he could be making is that the writers are demonstrating their hate boner for the main character because several characters in the show are explicitly calling Mark out, which is just kind of a weak argument when you've already shown numerous examples of the exact opposite happening.
I don't know if I can deal with it much longer. Guys are dicks. But Mark's one of the good ones. He's super into you. You're all he talks about. Really? Well, thanks for that.
I know it's hard to love someone when they don't seem to love you back, but Mark loves you. He'd be here if he could.
Almost like this show is trying to give us multiple sides of the same character. Mark is a good guy at heart, for now at least, but the entire purpose of this show is to follow him maturing, learning how to balance his life and treat other people, sometimes taking the wrong messages away. He wants to do the right thing, but he fails to do so constantly. Picking out a singular example of this as evidence that the writers secretly hate him betrays a complete inability to interpret events when they're not spoon-fed to you. Mark is a very bad boyfriend in season 1. He constantly makes promises to respect his girlfriend's time and then completely fails to actually make good on those promises, and then gives incredibly lame excuses to dodge accountability for failing to make good on those promises, and he constantly puts his girlfriend in mortal danger. We should probably talk about that part, right? Many people, including the aforementioned video essay, argue that Mark's poor behavior is justified because he was off doing more important things. Dinner with the GF's parents is just not a priority when he could be learning how to save the world from asteroids. And this is generally true, or rather would be if Mark were honest about what he was doing. See, I've had the basic premise of this video rattling around in my head for a few years now, and for the longest time I was going to make the argument that by lying about his secret identity to his girlfriend, he is actively making her a target of discerning supervillains without her knowledge or consent. I was going to point out that a villain with a grudge against our hero could find out who Amber is and harm her out of vengeance or leverage. And of course, I would have been right if I said that. It makes sense that Mark wouldn't want to share his identity with a non-superhero that he doesn't know very well, but if we accept that premise, then non-superheroes are off the table. You don't get to date people you're actively endangering without allowing them to make an informed decision. But of course, I'm not simply content with being right in principle, I must also be able to cite my sources. By Invincible Season 2, Amber has made the voluntary decision to maintain a relationship with Mark Grayson with a decent understanding of the danger that relationship puts her in. Miraculously, she's a lot more forgiving now, almost like she had a specific problem that needed to be addressed in Season 1, and now that it has been addressed, she's generally secure in the relationship. And then Season 2, Episode 7 hits.
Come with me now, or this woman dies. If you think you can cross the space between us before I tear this woman's head from her body, you're welcome to try.
What some viewers didn't seem to recognize in the first batch of episodes, despite it feeling fairly obvious to me, is that something like this was bound to happen. And if Mark maintained his secrecy, he would have been knowingly preventing Amber from evaluating this risk. Because I apparently have to keep reiterating this for a certain subset of people, Mark isn't like an evil monster for doing the wrong thing here. The stakes are incredibly high and he should absolutely feel guilty about his actions, but it's also quite easy to understand where a high schooler in an unprecedented situation might not be entirely objective. So that's pretty much the argument, right? Mark had no right to lie to protect his secret identity despite people's protestations, and so Amber is entirely justified in being angry with him. It really is that simple. You don't get to take your GF on a ride in a car with a broken seatbelt buckle without telling her that. This might feel like I'm being a bit repetitive here, but believe me, if the wrong people find this video, they're still not going to understand what I'm saying. Now, since we're all rational people, we should at least agree that Mark should have been a better boyfriend in Season 1. Either he should have been honest with Amber from the start, or he should have broken up with her to spare her the heartbreak. In this context, Amber is unambiguously right. Video title delivered, clickbait averted. But how she engages with her valid grievances is incredibly interesting and to me represents one of the most realistic depictions of the teenage mindset that I personally have seen on television. Her actions are understandable from the narrow perspective of a 17-ish-year-old, but they become obviously flawed with maturity. The key moment the anti-Amber lobbyists point to as evidence of poor behavior happens in Episode 6 after a violent clash with a robotic sex predator. Invincible saves the day and then suddenly shows back up as Mark Grayson, prompting Amber to respond angrily.
You said you wanted to start over. You said that. You promised. Even Eve vouched for you, and then you do this? Eve was wrong about you. So was I.
As previously mentioned, with the additional context of Episode 7, we know that Amber strongly suspects Mark of being a superhero in this scene, meaning that to some degree she is feigning or redirecting her anger. But since we also agree that Mark is wrong for keeping a secret, and we do agree on that, right? We can take a moment to consider Amber's motivations in this scene and realize she isn't really asking all that much. On first watch, we're meant to interpret Amber as feeling abandoned. On rewatch, we realize that her fear is, at least to some extent, a ploy, an attempt to use the legitimate emotions a betrayed partner would feel in this situation to convince Mark to cut the act and just tell the truth. I get the impression that some people think she's just angry to be angry here, but the underlying logic makes a ton of sense. Teenagers often think of their lives as storybooks, packed with important bombshell moments and romantic confessions. It's an oversimplified view of life, to be sure, and a major part of maturing is learning to see these shades of gray more clearly, but the feelings are real. Was a public blow-up the best way to extract the truth from Mark? No, not by a long shot. This was an issue that would have been much better handled in private. Is Mark understandably hurt in this scene? Yes, of course. This is a subplot about two people who are each growing up and finding the ways in which their respective personal journeys conflict with one another, creating situations where both characters are handling their side imperfectly, but understandably. A lot of the Amber hate revolves around this idea that she is obviously in the wrong, that the decisions she makes are nothing short of laughable. But in examining the situation from a perspective outside of our title character, we come to realize that the people in Mark's lives have their own stories going on, their own motivations, egos, wants, follies, and last I checked, that's a sign of good writing. Which, not to brag, is something that I personally like. Yeah, I said it. I like good writing. That might be the most vacuous thing I've ever said on here. Thank you for watching this far. If you like this sort of thing, then there's quite a bit of Invincible content on this channel. Just a big old playlist up there. I already linked it earlier. I don't know if I'm going to link it again. But otherwise, feel free to like that smash button and give me the oh so delightful subscription. And I'll see y'all in the next one.